Good morning, welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, where do Manchester United go from here? Defeat at West Ham means Jose Mourinho's side, they've made their worst start to a season for 29 years. Chelsea and Liverpool, they protect their unbeaten Premier League records. Daniel Sturridge came off the bench yesterday to score the equaliser for Liverpool at Stamford Bridge. And the former Chelsea chief executive, it's Peter Kenyon. He's linked with a £300 million bid to rescue Newcastle from the clutches of Mike Ashley. Here to discuss all that and much more, Dominic Fifield is the London football correspondent for The Guardian. Matt Dunn is a sports reporter with The Daily Express. And Rob Draper, he's chief football writer with The Mail on Sunday. Morning, guys. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at the papers then. What could possibly compete with the Ryder Cup for back page news this morning? Well, it is, of course, this man, Jose Mourinho. The end is nigh for Jose. That's according to The Mail on Sunday. This morning, Simon Jones reporting that United players, the staff at Manchester United, they believe it's all over for Mourinho. We're coming straight on to that in part one of today's programme. The Sunday People, all reflecting on Mourinho, as you'd imagine, after that defeat at West Ham yesterday. Wound up, Mourinho rants at his players, the supporters and the ref as the crisis deepens at Manchester United. They've got a big game in the Champions League this week against Valencia, and then, of course, they go on to play Newcastle at Old Trafford next weekend. The lows, Jose turns on his stars after that defeat yesterday. Back of the Express as well, the hammer blow for Jose. Matt was there at that game yesterday. We'll talk to him about it in a few moments' time. David Walsh, columnist with the Sunday Times, he says Mourinho's boundless narcissism is the reason why he's failed to develop as a manager. Of course, hugely successful manager, but it doesn't look good for him as Manchester United manager as things stand. One transfer story, big one, this in the Sun this morning. This is Kylian Mbappe on his way to Manchester City. According to the Sun this morning, it's going to cost them a few quid, £200 million, according to this story. Of course, he's the rising star of Paris Saint-Germain, the rising star of world football. That's Kylian Mbappe. OK, before we start talking about Manchester United and Jose Mourinho, we've got more sad news to reflect on this week, which is the passing of James Lawton, former Expressman, former independent football reporter, sports writer, chief sports writer, one of the biggest names in the game. Matt is someone that you worked with, someone who you spent a lot of time in your formative years as a journalist. Could you just reflect on Jim's personality, his writing, what he brought to our industry, and just what a big figure he was? Well,
when I went straight from university to the Express, and Jim was there, and he was Mr. Daily Express at the time. Just previous to when I joined, he had 4 million followers in an age when you actually had to buy a newspaper to be a follower. That was the command he had, and they were all loyal followers of his. In 1990, Viv Richards delayed the start a session of a test match to climb up the rickety stairs to Antigua to have a fight over something that he'd written in his column. And that was a sort of sway he held at the time, and that continues through today. I thought I was lucky because he was always so kind and generous with his time and his advice growing up. And I thought that was something to do with being a colleague and a former colleague when he moved on and won all those awards at The Independent. But it turns out this week, following the Twitter feeds and everything this week, he was that generous with so many young journalists. So sort of his beacon of journalism seems to be carried on through a number of people who were lucky enough to spend time with him. I think at a time when the value of the written word is being eroded so much, not only was his always so stylish, but it was also the truth that he held. He held that responsibility of taking 4 million people with him so seriously. He was always fair-minded. There were never any cheap shots. It was always considered. And I lost count of the times that I would read his column and say, do you know what, Jim, I've never thought about it like that, but you're absolutely right. And that continued. The family gave permission for him to print his last column in the Irish Independent on Saturday, and we'll deal with it later, but what he wrote about Mourinho and Pogba was as valid now as it was when he was writing for 4 million readers all those years ago. Yeah, he certainly had panache and a great style about him and a real swagger, Rob.
Yeah, I was thinking this week that in an age when going viral didn't mean anything, he defined that in the way he would... the force of his words, he'd carry you with the force and the literary nature of his words, and you'd end up thinking, oh no, actually I can see that. And these days someone will write a blog or someone will write something good online and it will go viral and it will go around the world. And he sort of defined that for younger writers and for even writers who are coming into the game now. They may not be aware how influenced they have been by Jim Lawton, but because all the columnists who write now were completely influenced by him, you know, his power goes on through that, and he was global in a time when that didn't happen. He went to work for the Vancouver Sun in Canada for 8 years because in North America they really appreciated his writing, and the standard of sports writing in North America is really high, and they revere it. And so it was no small thing for them to say, we want one of your British writers over here in Canada. And I think that's a measure of him, that all around the world people recognise the craft that he had.
Sure, and respected him as well, Tom.
Yeah, his writing was almost poetic in its style, absolutely magnificent. I mean, it says everything that people like Paul Hayward look up to Jim Lawton still. I think that sums it up. But I mean, I remember starting up on Merseyside, and Jim, you know, press box is a daunting place when you're coming in, you're a young kid and you're coming in there, and Jim would just welcome you and treat you almost like an equal. And I'm never going to be anywhere near Jim Lawton. I mean, I'm not his equal in any way, and yet he had that manner about him that made you feel as if you belonged, and you could just soak up information from him and style from him.
Yeah.
And he was something else. He was one of the greats.
Yeah, he certainly was a masterful figure. James Lawton, who passed away last week at the age of 75. OK, on to business then. Manchester United lost again yesterday, this time at West Ham. You were there at the London Stadium to watch it. We'll go back, we'll throw it back to defeat against Derby in the penalty shootout, Carabao Cup the following day, of course, with Mourinho and Paul Pogba. But when you watched Manchester United yesterday, what did you see, Matt?
A very tepid performance from a team that just looked ordinary. None of this, we talked about swagger already in this programme. There's none of the... It wasn't Manchester United. It wasn't Manchester United. At no point, even when they scored the goal to come back, I mean, Rob was at the same game, and there was no sense that, oh, they're going to turn it around now. Because, first of all, West Ham, it must be said right at the start, because they'll be upset if we don't recognise it, played very well. But United just had nothing about them. They didn't look dangerous. They were going at half speed. No one seemed to be getting stuck in. There was no second balls being won. And they weren't turning the screw at all. And that is just totally un-Manchester United. And unfortunately, there's one person steering that ship, and that's Jose Mourinho at the moment. And he's got a lot of questions to answer now.
Yeah. Rob, you were there too. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about the other issues around that club, but what did you see yesterday with United?
I think the most astounding thing was after 15 minutes, a stat flashed up that West Ham had 85% possession in the first 15 minutes. And I mean, this is a West Ham side that lost the first 4 games of the season. You know, that Manchester United would go there with it was meant to be a back 3, but it turned into a back 5 because they were pinned back. I mean, Manchester United have been in an identity crisis ever since Sir Alex left, obviously, but it really was, it felt like an existential crisis. What is the point of Manchester United if you're going to West Ham and seemingly starting on the back foot and inviting them onto you? It just goes against everything. I actually think it goes against everything. I know people caricature Mourinho as a defensive coach, but he was at his peak, he was much more than that. He was a much more interesting, innovative coach than a caricature. And it doesn't look like a Jose Mourinho team. It looks like he's having an identity crisis, that the club are having an identity crisis. It feels like they're in a complete cul-de-sac, and the only way out of this would be to change leadership, but I guess we'll get onto that in a minute.
Yeah. Do you think, well, this is the back page of your paper this morning, the end is nigh. United's players believe, and so do the staff. Do you believe it's the end?
I think that Simon Jones, who wrote the story, is very well connected. It also chimes with something that someone close to the club said to me this week, that people think the chatter around the club amongst people in the dressing room is that this could unravel very, very quickly, and that's obviously the the sense of crisis they've got to, and only Ed Woodward really knows. Their problem is they've got to, what do you do for the next 7-8 months of the season, because it's still a big season to fight for. They've still got to make the top 4. They've got a Champions League campaign, obviously FA Cups, etc. to play for. So Manchester United is not a club that can just blow in the wind for 8 months and wait for the right man to come along. Obviously Zinedine Zidane would be available, and he's been touted, but if you're going to appoint Zidane, you've got to be sure that's your manager for the next 3 years. And every appointment they've made since Sir Alex Ferguson, they've looked like they're not sure that this is the man for the next 3 years. Can this be the man? They're hoping it's the man for the next 6-9 months and get us out of a hole.
Dom, you covered Chelsea when Mourinho was sacked for the second time.
Yeah.
That was after 10 defeats.
Yeah.
The defeat number 10 was at Leicester, wasn't it? Is this the same story unfolding, or is it worse?
That was dire. I mean, I think that was probably worse in terms of results. But one parallel to be drawn now, that spell in the autumn of 2015, Chelsea sort of occasionally flickered into life. I mean, they had a good win against Arsenal in the middle of that run. They had a few results in the Champions League as well. And every time that happened, you thought, OK, they're turning a corner now. They're going to get back to what they were last season, which was a Premier League title-winning side. United had just won. They won those 3 away games, and we sort of clung to that as evidence that he can still turn it around. That it's not gone that far yet. The reality is they're in a tailspin, and the fact that this last week has happened, it just demonstrates that he can't arrest this decline. Unfortunately, he was mystified by it at Chelsea. He never offered any sort of conviction that he knew how to stop that rot. And I get the impression now that the same thing is happening at United. That the problems are too ingrained. It's a lack of leadership at the top. There's obviously a massive issue with Paul Pogba, but any other club, you've got a player there, disaffected star player who wants to leave. Look at Chelsea. Eden Hazard wants to go to Real Madrid. We all know that. He said it virtually at the end of the World Cup. But Maurizio Sarri and Chelsea have got him playing brilliantly. Brilliantly. That's the job of a manager. And unfortunately, Mourinho seems to go the other way and almost wants to ostracise him and pin him onto the sidelines. And that's just not going to work.
Is there any way out for Mourinho? Dom says in a tailspin. Rob thinks it's close.
Yeah, the way out for Mourinho is through the exit doors.
This is Manchester United.
Yeah,
one of the biggest names, if not the most prestigious job in world football. It's up there with Real Madrid. However you want to look at it, however you want to dress it up, it is undoubtedly one of the most prestigious jobs to have, and he is about to lose it.
I think so, yeah. It depends on the Manchester United board, because all that's keeping him in that job at the moment is the Manchester United name and the feeling that we've got to do the right thing. Because you look at it, he's not going to turn that dressing room around. It's a case of managing when you swing the axe, because... I'm a big fan of Jose Mourinho's. I went on Chelsea, you were on the same one. We spent an hour and a half in his company. When he's on form, he's a very engaging man, very personable, very pleasant. But for whatever reason, he's picking fights with his entire dressing room. But not only that, what struck me this week is his strength of will is no longer enough. He's having to do dressing downs of Pogba in front of other players. So he needs them to see the bad side. It's almost like it's stage managed, like the rest of the dressing room need to be seen to be against you and on my side. His will is not enough anymore with Pogba. And he's just losing the plot. I mean, what's Sanchez going to think, travelling all the way down, not getting a bench, regardless, right or wrong? What's Jess Lingard going to think? He didn't play, he wasn't even in the squad yesterday. He plays an extra defender and leaves Eric Bailly on the bench. He upsets Marshall by leaving him out the side, and then when he puts him in the side, blames us press people for calling for it, because the implication being that he wasn't very good. He's upset so many. Luke Shaw's another player that he's upset. Yeah, how many players do you have to upset in your dressing room? And there's no reaction. The only reason to go against your players is to spark a reaction. And there was no reaction or any sign of anything yesterday. And, you've played your big card and it's not worked. So it's not going to change.
That happened a lot at Chelsea as well. There was a lot of carrot and stick. He'd praise Hazard one week and then he'd slaughter him publicly the next. And that is history repeating itself. And the stuff in midweek with the penalties.
What does Phil Jones think?
Jones and Bailly under the bus with that. it's just not, it isn't working, and it won't turn around.
You can go through the list of players that he's publicly criticised in 7 or 8, 9. You know,
Marcus
from
Rashford.
Shaw.
Donny's just mentioned them all.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
gone through the whole squad.
Well, it's virtually a whole team. And that's the point.
Is anybody left in the dressing room? Does he have anybody on side anymore?
Well, I don't think he's criticised Matic, who was his man, I'd say, but he has criticised the team generally, so you could include him in that. And I don't think he's publicly gone for Lukaku in recent times, has he? But there's only that, you know.
That's one of his signs.
We're struggling to find the players he hasn't criticised, aren't we? You know, and Young, he's pretty safe on, isn't he? Who didn't have a great game yesterday. I think what the problem here is that Mourinho doesn't seem to be able to recognise in his maturing years that his personality's actually part of the tailspin. And we talked about the charm, which he undoubtedly has. We see much less of that now. And for whatever reason, you know, in the early years, yes, there was bullying, there was always conflict, there's always stage-managed press conferences, he'd get off in a huff, but there were moments of charm and levity with that. And I can't remember when we last had a moment of levity from Jose. The last time a Jose Mourinho team excited me was in that title-winning season with Chelsea. They went to Swansea and won, I think, 6-0, and they looked 5-0, looked fantastic. And then they sort of put the handbrake on then because he obviously felt the league was won. That was a beautiful side. That was a beautiful game of football, and that's the last time, we're talking 3.5 years ago, a Jose Mourinho side I've gone, wow, you know, that's something. I just haven't seen it, and there's something going on in his head or in his sort of life that is stopping him from being the coach that we know he is. And he was sort of, you know, even sort of certainly 10 years ago, but even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, the amazing thing about what you just said about that Swansea game is if you'd have asked me, and we hadn't talked about this before the show, and we hadn't, is if you said, when was the last great Mourinho performance from one of his teams, I'd have said exactly the same.
Yeah.
Swansea.
It's a long time ago, isn't it?
And it is you said, what,
2015 it would have been, wouldn't it?
It's 3 years ago.
It was in January, February time.
And that was after the Spurs defeat on New Year's Day that they got badly beaten then. And he did go more conservative over the second half of that season. I mean, go back to remember when they won 6-3 at Everton earlier that season? Yeah. Absolutely fantastic swashbuckling performance from his team. But he got pragmatic after Christmas and made sure they got over the line. Well, we shouldn't underestimate also that these players are underperforming. I mean, these players should be doing better than this. They should be able to rouse themselves. They should be able to inject some energy into midfield. I mean, there's no reason for them to be lacklustre in there and be overrun by West Ham United.
No. I mean, I think generally also Manchester United fans are very supportive of Jose Mourinho, and if it were Mourinho or Pogba, most of them, certainly up until the last few weeks, would have probably gone for Mourinho. And I think there is a DNA in Manchester United. You back the manager. You don't back the star player who's kicking off. You back the manager, and he's had quite a lot of loyalty from the fans and a degree of loyalty from the board. But you might argue that it felt like the summer was a turning point whereby they didn't spend the money on the players that he wanted, and at that point you were already thinking, well, if they don't want to spend the money on him now, is that because they don't think he's there for the long term? And that felt like a turning point.
They brought in Fred, didn't they? They also brought in Sanchez back in January.
Yeah.
What was your interpretation of the incident, the training ground incident between Pogba and Mourinho?
Well, the same interpretation as everyone. These are two men that, on that particular morning, clearly weren't getting on with each other. And I think we get so few glimpses into what goes on that you have to extrapolate that and say, you know, there's clearly some sort of rift there between them. Mourinho's not managing it well, Pogba's not managing it well either, because ultimately it does him no favours to sort of stink the place out for Manchester United on occasions. He should be on top of the world. He's come off a World Cup. You see, he was I was in the French press conference after winning the World Cup. He can be the glue in a dressing room in amongst a group of people who are popular with him when they're winning. Might not be someone you want in the dressing room when they're losing, but if you can tap into that, he'll bring other players along with him. But Jose doesn't seem to want to recognise that, doesn't seem to know how to get that out of him. I mean, he tried to give him the armband, which, to my mind, showed at least he's thinking about how to do it. That didn't work because he gave up on it so quickly. And, you know, you look at, say, Pochettino, regardless of the rights or the wrongs, he backs his players. Hugo Lloris had his off-the-field incident with the drink driving, but he stuck stuck by his player and said, no, you're my skipper for the overall reasons, not just for one incident. Same with Pogba. He should say, no, you've upset me a little bit with your attitude, but you're my captain, go and prove it. You can't just keep chopping and changing tactical approaches. And that's a sign of a manager who's lost it.
Will they chop and change the manager, though, Dom? Will they? Zinedine Zidane, of course, left Real Madrid at the end of last season, hugely successful with the hat-trick of Champions League triumphs. Do they turn to Zidane?
I'd be surprised if that's the route they went down. I think Real Madrid was a very unique situation for Zidane to take over, and he'd also had a bit of a spell at that club, and he sort of knew the squad and knew what he was going to inherit. I think that is a big risk, although it might actually work with Pogba and convince Pogba to stay. I mean, there are other candidates long term. I mean, Pochettino, you mentioned, is a good long term opponent. I also wonder about Antonio Conte. I mean, we've forgotten about. He's effectively on gardening leave. No settlement agreed yet with Chelsea, but he's succeeded Mourinho before and done quite well.
Briefly, though.
Well, briefly, yes. I'm not saying he's a long term answer, because I think ultimately Antonio Conte will have the same problems with the dressing room.
He's the same abrasive kind of
absolutely.
though,
but he has worked with Pogba and done well with Pogba before.
Yeah, OK. Manchester United, they do need to find some solutions pretty quick. They've got the Champions League tie with Valencia in the week, and then, of course, Newcastle at Old Trafford next weekend. OK, next up, Don was at Stamford Bridge yesterday to see Chelsea. They drew with Liverpool. More on that next. OK, let's reflect on Chelsea's draw with Liverpool last night. The Sunday Express front page of their sports section. Dan's in the nick of time. Daniel Sturridge coming off the substitutes bench yesterday. An absolute peach of a strike from the edge of the box to secure that point for Liverpool. Both teams unbeaten. Matt's just made the point this isn't a great day for newspapers when there's a draw, because there isn't an unbeaten record, or that both teams remain unbeaten, Dom. But you were there yesterday. What did we learn from this fixture between two powerful Premier League rivals?
Well, we learnt that Liverpool have got resources off the bench that can save contests, save games for them. That was we thought when Daniel Sturridge actually came on, he was bringing you on too late, if anything. But with virtually his first involvement, to conjure that finish was just stunning, absolutely stunning. And that was on a day when Mo Salah didn't have one of his best days. Roberto Firmino was very, very quiet indeed. And yet they still had the ability to turn a match late on and claim something from it. I was surprised at Chelsea, to be honest, because I thought that Chelsea would be exposed defensively in a game like that. I thought Liverpool's front three would run riot. I haven't really been convinced by David Luiz, even Marcus Alonso and Azpilicueta as fullbacks in a back four. For large parts of this season, and we always reflect back to the first half against Arsenal, when really the visitors could have scored 4 or 5 in the first half. But Chelsea dug deep, and they almost produced a Conte-like defensive performance in a Sarri team, and that was almost enough to claim them the win. We know that they've got the magic in the ranks with Hazard, a player that can just conjure anything from nothing. But they also got they're very, very, very well balanced midfield. Kovacic looks a real find for them this season. And Jorginho is the sort of metronome, the player who sets the tempo. So there's a lovely balance to that. It was a defence that we were worried about. But when you see David Luiz actually perform like he did yesterday, you wonder whether they could actually be contenders this season after all. I have my doubts, but yesterday sort of suggested that they may well be up there for a while longer.
What does it say about the final few months of Antonio Conte's regime, when David Luiz was asked about his future? Had Conte stayed, and he said there wouldn't have been a future. I had a couple of offers from other football clubs. I'd have been on my way. What does it say about him, or was that just a player disaffected because he wasn't in the Chelsea team under Conte at the end?
I think it'd be interesting to ask Sarri that question, because he was quite interested in his press conference on Friday, pointing out Chelsea's yo-yo record under Mourinho, where they won the title at a canter, then dropped 20-odd points. Then he knew all the figures exactly, by the way, how many points they got each season. And he made the point they went 43 points difference between season to season. So I don't know how much he trusts his own dressing room to give him performances on a week-by-week basis. I think he's still finding that out, what the character's like, whether it's a problem in his dressing room. How could Conte's title winners fall off so badly? How did Mourinho's problems are perhaps more obvious, but they've done that twice now under different coaches, and I think he's concerned. It's going well at the moment, and I think he's just trying to keep a lid on it to try and smooth out those things. So people like Luis, who can win a title, and then suddenly isn't interested. It's a strange one, that, because Chelsea have the potential to be title winners, but Sarri's telling everyone that they're a year away from being ready. I think he's so desperate to keep a lid on the excitement because I think he suspects there is something in that dressing room that could explode on him. But with his more softly approach, and not the abrasive nature of a Conte or Mourinho, I think he's trying to manage that better and anticipate problems before he's hit with them.
He does. He's one of those managers, though, you'd look at his record, his track record, and say, you need to win a trophy.
Absolutely.
Great football, and everyone enjoys it, despite Dom saying, yes, a little bit more defensive, but that's for obvious reasons with the threat of Liverpool's.
There's obviously a few of those managers in the Premier League, but he has got the resources to win a trophy, so... I think...
Get on with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go and win one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a more valid question to ask of him to deliver silverware than it is perhaps at Spurs, who haven't for ages, which is the other one. Pochettino's the other one, obviously.
What does it say about the resolve of Liverpool, though, as well? That 4 minutes from time, Daniel Sturridge is introduced to that Liverpool side, and it felt too little, too late. But then he conjures up an absolute wonder strike to equalise for Liverpool. But what does it say about that side that they've come back at Chelsea to grind out, to find a way to get a point?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why they're going to be closer to Manchester City this year is because the defence is so much better and it's almost sort of a different back four. But the other reason is now you look at the bench and there's much more, it feels like there's much more strength there. And what a joy to see Daniel Sturridge playing like that again, or scoring like that. Obviously he didn't play for that long, because that's the Sturridge you remember from the Suarez Sterling team. That, I mean, at his best, he was just far and away the best striker in England. He has so much talent, and it was just
21 Premier League goals that season.
Yeah, it was a joy. It's a joy to see him playing with that sort of panache and confidence. And obviously the front three at Liverpool were exquisite last season, so it seems hard for him to push his way in. But maybe there is a role in sort of cup games. Maybe there is a role whereby coming off the bench, whereby he will slowly begin to regather that. Because I don't think anyone's expecting Mo Salah to have the season he had last season again. I mean, he might get to 30 goals. That would be wonderful. But last season, what was outstanding. I'm not sure the front three can necessarily repeat exactly what they did. Mane might have a slightly better season because arguably he was slightly off last season compared to the other two. So, I hope Sturridge can come in there. And I think that strength, basically the strength of squad, is going to help them. And you feel they are going to get close to City this year. My guess would be that City will still have the strength to go on and win it. But you feel like there will be a bit of a tussle this year.
There is an England squad, which we will get onto in the next part, which is announced this week for games against Croatia and Spain, Dom. Do we dare to speculate about Daniel Sturridge?
Yeah, well, we did before the show. I mean, he's got 4 goals, I think, this season already. I think he managed 3 last.
None for West Brom. Didn't score at all for West Brom, did he, on that loan spell?
I mean, I think he's not... I don't think he's in a place yet where he can play 90 minutes. So if Gareth Southgate is thinking about who he's going to pick at a tournament, and he's thinking that far long term, that far ahead, then maybe he doesn't go with a 29-year-old whose body has let him down too much in the recent past. However, if he's looking at the Nations League games in specifically next month, and he thinks that Harry Kane's going to start both those games against Croatia and Spain, and yet he might need to throw somebody on late on to nick a goal, he's your man. He's your man, because he'll come on for 15 minutes and he could have that impact like he did yesterday. He's got all the talent. He's just been...
Look what he did. It was Wales, wasn't it? Euro 2016.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. That was the stoppage time winner then. Well, we all know that he's got the pedigree for it. It's just whether his body was up to it. He would be an option. England don't have an awful lot of options at centre forward. I mean, we were talking it through before, and it's, now that Jamie Vardy's no longer there, are you looking at someone like a Calvert-Lewin coming in who won't have the same goal-scoring pedigree that Daniel Sturridge has got. So if you just want somebody to come on and have a cameo and maybe turn a game for you, then go with Sturridge.
And it's at those moments of intensity, of pressure, teams losing 1-0, 4 minutes to go, and he gets sent on. There's not many players who've got that kind of quality to score that type of goal.
Not at that sort of level as well. I mean, obviously Rashford came on, immediately turned the game at West Ham yesterday. But you're right, well, there's a vacuum being created by Vardy for someone senior enough to trust to come on and make a difference. And Sturridge fits that bill, and it all depends on how seriously Southgate takes the competitive nature of the Nations League, because I think there's a worry that if we do badly in Croatia especially, we could end up bottom of a difficult three-team group, and then our seedings get affected for future competitions. And I think it's just one to watch out for.
Yeah. OK, we'll see whether Gareth Southgate does indeed name Daniel Sturridge, or if he thinks about it when he names his squad on Thursday for those games against Croatia and Spain. Yesterday's draw opened up, of course, the possibility for Manchester City to remain top of the table. Or they went top when they beat Brighton yesterday. They remain there because of the results at Chelsea. Is that the point, tipping point almost of, OK, Manchester City, they've established that they're now back on top. They've conceded 3 goals this season, scored 20-odd. Is that the point where we think, OK, this is only heading one way again?
It feels slightly ominous, like those first 4 or 5 laps of a 10,000 metres at the Olympics, where the Ethiopians are sort of playing around, in 6th or 7th place, and then after about 5 laps, they get to the front, and you think, right, that race is over now. That's what it felt like a little bit yesterday. I'm hopeful it will be a little bit more than that, because I think Liverpool are a wonderful side now and have got balance. And I think, as Dom said, Chelsea have really surprised. And I do wonder whether Chelsea have got a midfield to almost match Manchester City now. That is a fantastic midfield. That's apart from Hazard, that's the strength of the side. And Kovacic is been. I mean, it's as English sort of fans, we want Loftus-Cheek in there, we want Barkley in there, but it's hard to argue with the experience and the technique that he's brought. He's brought an improvement that those players, I would say, and Kante we know all about. Jorginho is just fantastic in that role. So I feel like there will be a contest. I think you'd think Liverpool would be the one that get closest. So I don't think we quite have to. It's almost this time last year we were pretty much saying a City have won the league. I don't think it's going to be quite like that. I'd like to think in February we might still be debating it a little bit. I suspect by March, April it might have gone though.
Yeah, but if they survive next weekend, of course, because they go to Liverpool, don't they, next Sunday? If they emerge from that unscathed, of course they've had their problems with Liverpool in particularly last season in the Champions League, Don. But if they emerge unscathed from that'll be important to them.
Absolutely. I don't think the chasing pack are going to give up. There was always some at the end of the game yesterday. The players seemed quite friendly. They sort of almost got together, and it was almost you were watching, and the managers as well. You're almost watching the best of the rest, sort of uniting, thinking, well, we at least we're improving, and we're closing that gap to City. I mean, look, that's a massive game next weekend, mouth-watering match. But Liverpool will still go into that match with loads of confidence. I mean, that was still a good point. It was still a good performance from Liverpool yesterday. And Jurgen Klopp he wasn't downhearted at losing the 100% record at the end. He was, he's talking bullishly. He knows that they're a much improved team. Now they've got a tricky game in midweek as well, obviously, with in the Champions League, Napoli. But there's a lot of optimism around.
Well, there should be 6 wins in the Premier League and a draw so far, and a draw at Chelsea is an excellent start to the season. There's one other story actually in the papers this morning about John Terry, former Chelsea defender, of course, legendary figure at the club. Clement Moody says that it's all agreed for him to replace or to succeed Jody Morris as head of the academy side. Is that the obvious next step for John Terry? Of course, we saw a couple of weeks ago his interview in the Mail that he had potential offers elsewhere to continue his playing career. He wants to be a coach. He's working his way through his badges. But is Chelsea the obvious step for him?
I think so, yeah. I mean, he's so dyed-in-the-wool Chelsea. He needs experience of some sort of coaching if he's ever going to get a top job. And knowing John Terry's mentality, that's what he's got his eyes on one day. So yeah, it just seems a good fit for Chelsea, because it brings some of that, someone that the players can look up to in the academy. They're the era that they would have grown up first knowing and seen lifting trophies, whether he played or not, in his full kit. But no, he is a figure that will command respect there, and it just seems an obvious fit. Some of the curveballs and going all around the world or various clubs, that doesn't sound like John Terry. I think his heart stays fairly close to home.
There's a massive irony in that, though, isn't there? That is about 20 years ago John Terry came through to the academy and into the first team. And since then, a wonderful academy producing wonderful players, but no regular first-team players. So if John Terry goes back and is the man who can actually get one of those players to become a player who sticks in the first team, would be a nice little sort of circular view of history. But that was pre-Roman Abramovich, of course. That's the old Chelsea academy that kind of got booted out because we're going to update it and modernise it and make it all better. But it makes quite a lot of money for the club, but it isn't producing first-team players.
No, sure. OK, interesting to see if that does indeed happen. John Terry, we think, on his way back to Chelsea to succeed Jody Morris. OK, next up, we're going to talk about England, the sale of Wembley Stadium, and Dan Ashworth moving on to become Brighton's technical director. More on that coming next. Welcome back. With us this morning, Dominic Fifield, strident Matt Dunn, and Rob Draper. Let's remind you what's in the papers this morning. Mail on Sunday, competing with the golf. Of course, only one man who could do that, and that's Mourinho. The end is nigh for Jose after that defeat at West Ham. Simon Jones reporting that on the back of the Mail on Sunday this morning. The Sunday Mirror, the highs with the golf, but the lows here. Paul Pogba and Jose Mourinho at war at loggerheads after that bust-up in the week at the training ground. The Sunday People wound up. Jose rants at the players, the supporters and the referee. The crisis deepens. David Walsh reflecting on it in his column this morning. Mourinho's boundless narcissism has been his downfall ever since his first spell as Chelsea manager. A transfer story on the back page of The Sun. Rob Draper loves this one. Kylian Mbappe at Paris Saint-Germain, rising star of world football. As if Man City don't have enough great players who want another one. It's going to cost them about £200 million. That's according to The Sun this morning. Dom was at Stamford Bridge last night. He saw this, an absolute wonder goal, a peach of a strike from Daniel Sturridge off the bench with 4 minutes to go. He equalised for Liverpool. OK, let's talk England now, because there's a squad announced on Thursday for the games in the Nations League against Croatia and Spain. We've got Dan Ashworth to talk about, but first of all, I want to talk about Wembley and the sale of the stadium, which looks as though it will proceed, looks as though it will go through. Matt, what are your views on the state of play as things stand? Not confirmed yet, not rubber stamped, but moving in that direction.
Well, certainly the FA are pushing in that direction,
Yep.
which is the key thing. Why not? We didn't have a national stadium until 1999. We only bought it so that football only bought it so they could knock it down and build a new one. Spain managed, Germany managed without a national stadium that they own. Providing the right covenants are there that protects the right for England to play there. But for ages we've been talking about how we've got to get away from Wembley and get round to the country.
We did that for the Switzerland game, and the FA ended up giving tickets away to fill that stadium.
That was a one-off. That was probably the wrong call, the wrong stadium. If you look at Ellen Road, that was a fantastically positive experience.
OK, USA in November. How many will turn up for that?
What, Wembley? That'll be, well, you get 60 or 70,000. They normally do for friendlies, possibly even more. It's difficult because it depends on the balance of how important you see the Croatia game, because it does affect tendencies, what they're back-to-back with, and people tend to pick or choose one. But that's not entirely the point, really. Whether we play there or not is irrelevant. I don't see why we have to own it. Obviously that's a big West Ham.
This is a country obsessed with ownership.
Absolutely, but that's
obsessed with it.
That's the problem they've got. Providing they've got the right covenants, everything's set up. We were there for the Anthony Joshua fight together. A great night. I hope you enjoyed that bout. But yes.
Nobody says bout, as I was reminded on the night.
As you were reminded on the night. But it looks completely different. It's well designed enough to look different depending on who it's hosting. So it will look like the home of England, whether they own it or not. And it's £600 million. And yes, that money should be coming from Premier League clubs and from that TV rights deal and everything else, but it isn't, and there's no mechanism to wrest it out of the hands of the Premier League clubs. So in the meantime, let's get what money we can and not spend it on a great big arch which you can drive an underground train through. A little fascinating fact that I've picked up along the way. But let's spend it on getting some players to play in that stadium that are worth getting the fans to come along to.
Who do we trust to spend £600 million, Rob?
Well, that's the massive question, isn't it? I mean, it'd be a great idea if the £600 million was invested really wisely, but first of all, there's a fight over who gets that money, given all the various people. There's a fight over I think it was £120 million of Sport England money that went into securing the site for Wembley Stadium, and there's the FA Council to get through. So I think we're quite a long way from a done deal, given the FA's attempts to reform the FA in the past. I think we could still be returning to this in a couple of years' time, and you know whether we should sell it or not. But that said, I suppose essentially, what's the FA there for? Is it there to manage a stadium or to produce players? And I lean obviously more towards producing players, and not just producing players for the elite game, but actually getting kids playing, getting adults playing, you know, contributing to the welfare of the nation in that way. And I think that's primarily FA's job. So I totally get why they're looking at this. I'm not 100% convinced yet, because if you're going to give away a prime asset and you're going to spend £600 million, I'd want to know very clearly what we're giving away, what we're getting for it, and how that money is going to be spent.
Sell or not to sell?
I'm just amazed that there's only one buyer. I mean, why is what is it, Shahid Khan or nothing? I mean, is no one else out there interested in buying the National Stadium? Very surprising. And the FA must have been praying for some kind of bidding war to drive that price up even further. But yeah, I'm a bit with Matt. I think £600 million, if it's well spent, brilliant, fantastic.
OK, let's see if that sale does indeed go through ultimately to Shad Khan. England squad announced on Thursday. There'll be the inevitable questions about Dan Ashworth. Of course, he gave an interview to the FA after his resignation. He will become the technical director at Brighton. What are your thoughts on Ashworth leaving? The idea was for England to win the World Cup in 2022. He's leaving before that deadline. Is he jumping ship?
Jumping ship is probably a bit harsh. I think he's done a lot of the good work that we wanted him to do. I mean, St George's Park and the England DNA thing has obviously had an impact. He's worked closely with Southgate, which I think has helped Southgate. So I think it's a bit of a blow for Gareth to be losing Dan Ashworth. It's a coup for Brighton in terms of long-term planning. And establishing themselves in the Premier League, albeit I would say that I thought the brief of the job that they wanted filled was largely surrounding recruitment. I mean, Dan Ashworth's the last 6 years have been spent effectively building up the youth teams with the England set-up largely, and Brighton's academy is good already, and their training centre at Lancing is amazing. It's all established. So his main task will be recruitment, and he hasn't really been doing any of that in the last 6 years. So I think there's almost an element of risk in Brighton's appointment of him, because he's going to have to click into the recruitment drive very, very quickly. I'll be interested to see what the FA do next, because that role will be slightly different for his successor, I imagine. It's to continue what Dan has done, but also it'll have to work closely with Southgate again, and there'll be different tasks, I imagine, because all the DNA stuff is there. It's the philosophy is in place now. So what does the successor do, and what route do they go down on that front? I'd be interested.
Could Southgate straddle both roles?
I would be very surprised. I see Roberto Martinez is doing that now with Belgium, doing both those roles. But I think when we speak to Gareth, he seems to be all consumed with the England manager's role. To suddenly saddle him with being director of football as well might be a bit harsh, to be honest.
Any obvious names to succeed Ashworth?
Well, to be fair, Ashworth wasn't an obvious name in the first place. It's a very specific, there's a long, strong administrative side to that job. I don't think Gareth Southgate like you say, I think that's a step in the wrong direction, the way he sees his career path going. So I think that's a no-brainer. My concern is that how would we feel if Gareth Southgate left England to go and manage Brighton? If Chris Hughton suddenly went somewhere else? Should England be losing the talent that they back to Brighton Hove Albion? With all due respect to Brighton Hove Albion, it's not... Yeah, it just worries me that he's happy to jump ship from what should be a fairly blue ribbon job to go take control of the destiny of a Premier League side that's hoping to establish itself in the top flight, but it's a long way away from winning things. That just rung when I first saw the announcement. Just made me feel a bit uncomfortable with just how concrete this whole England situation is, and whether there's a fear, especially at the time. I mean, they managed to put some positive news out about Southgate fairly quickly afterwards, but at a time when his contract situation was being sort of talked over, it suddenly doesn't seem so very long term anymore at the FA, and that's my concern. So whoever they appoint has got to come in and adopt Dan Ashworth's beliefs. So if you're going to have a strong enough character, they're going to have their own views. And yeah, I think it's a difficult appointment for the FA, but an important one. To be honest, there aren't. I mean, I can't think. Could anyone else think of any names to come?
We banded a few around yesterday at Stamford Bridge, and people like Mike Rigg who've got experience of that role and have worked at the FA. You'd imagine they'd want somebody with some connection with the FA who sort of knows the system there. I do think it's very interesting that for years we've always talked about the director of football as this thing that this will guarantee continuity. Have a director of football, and it guarantees some kind of philosophy running through it. There's actually a bit of a transfer market developing for directors of football at the moment. The number of changes in recent times is incredible. Yep. I mean, it's basically it's almost like it's not quite at the same level as the managers now. They have a bit more longevity than that, but I don't know how long we'll be able to talk about them being sort of route for continuity for much longer, because they do swap and change quite often.
My guess would be that if you look at the recruitment of the FA, that you'll end up with someone who's run an Olympic programme, because that's very much the job now. So someone who's run one of the major Olympic sports, because that's effectively what Dan did. He got the FA up to speed with where the British Olympic Association and all their sports were, which was a transformation from 1996 of one gold medal to how many other hundreds in 2016, and that's the transformation over 20 years they went under, and the FA really, Dan's built that in his time there, and I think there is continuity because that will continue. That infrastructure is in place, like Dom said, so there's a continuity there, and they'll look for someone. It's now about managing that, obviously always pushing it on, but the heavy lifting has been done in that job. But in terms of Matt's point, I think the harsh reality is, we see this in Southgate's contract negotiations, England is a mid-table Premier League club, or rather a mid-table Premier League club will often pay more than the FA, and therefore that's the market. It was a good time to leave as well, though, wasn't it? I mean, really what the underage teams have done has been astounding, and the women's team has done well, and obviously on the back of a World Cup semi-final, it's not quite peak England, we hope, but that is pretty much as peak England as a director of football as you can get, and it's probably the right time to make a career move if you're just viewing it from your own personal point of view.
Sure. That's what worries me. Is there a suspicion within the FA that we've done really well, we haven't got what we wanted, which is to win the World Cup, but there's too many people around saying, do you know what, it's not going to get any better than this.
OK. The squad announcement is on Thursday. Just quickly, will there be any changes? Will Maddison come in, for example? Phil Foden, Daniel Taylor wrote about him in his Observer column this morning, 31 minutes in a Manchester City shirt so far this season. Will Southgate be tempted to turn to those players?
I think he might be tempted with Maddison. Maddison's playing regularly in long minutes for Leicester City. He's got a few holes to fill. I mean, Dele Alli is going to be injured and miss the games. He'll have Raheem Sterling back from the
Loftus-Cheek as well.
Well, yeah, but you can't pick Loftus-Cheek, unfortunately.
So that's what I mean,
and that is an issue for him. Centre half as well. There might be some changes there potentially, I guess.
Lallana was in the last squad, wasn't he?
Yeah, Lallana's now going to be presumably missing from this one.
Any other surprises, guys?
Well, yeah, Mason Mount is a player he really likes, but again, I think it's probably too. I think obviously in November you might see some of those names. These are actually they are competitive
changes
games
for the USA game.
Well, yeah,
sell lots of tickets.
Exactly.
Declan Rice is the one to look at. Do the FA put him in and give him a couple of minutes in one of these competitive games to make sure that he's pledged to England.
He's been very good recently. I've watched West Ham a lot recently. He's been very good.
He was good against Chelsea last weekend, wasn't he?
Yes,
at
he
London
was.
Stadium? Yeah. OK. We'll find out who's in Southgate's England squad for those games against Croatia and Spain on Thursday afternoon up at St George's Park. OK, next up, back to the Premier League. We're going to talk Mike Ashley and Peter Kenyon. Is he really about to buy Newcastle United? More on that coming next. Let's talk Newcastle now, Rob, because Mike Ashley suddenly started to appear at Newcastle matches again. He was at Selhurst Park to watch them draw with Crystal Palace last weekend. Incredibly, amazingly, he was at St James's Park yesterday. He watched his team lose against Leicester. There are stories in the Sunday papers this morning about Peter Kenyon, former chief executive at Chelsea, rounding up potential investors to buy the club from Mike Ashley. Is that a solution?
It could be. I mean, Peter Kenyon is a serious figure, and we obviously know him, and he has football pedigree. But it's more of an aspiration at the moment, isn't it? And I think Newcastle are one of the last sleeping giants left that is ripe for a kind of foreign takeover, and we could get this side in the top six, and it could be something. And that's always the attraction around Newcastle. But the problem doing a deal with Mike Ashley, we saw last season. It's very, very difficult to do deal with Mike Ashley. I'm not 100% convinced he really wants to sell the club. I think if you look at his real business, which is Sports Direct, and the branding that provides him within the stadium, that's worth an awful lot to him. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose everyone has their price, but we're now into more than 10 years of ownership of Mike Ashley. There's no suggestion that, I don't really think he's going to just sell it just like that. It would be a long, protracted negotiation. That's assuming you could get all the finance together and a backer. So I think for Newcastle United fans, it's not a case of sort of, oh, wow, the cavalry's coming around the corner, we're going to get rid of him. I'd imagine we'll still be talking about this in 6 months' time.
Newcastle fans don't want to hear that, though, do they? They want someone to come and buy their football club.
Well, desperately, yeah, and quite understandably, I think. The problem is, before takeovers became fashionable in the Premier League, I was covering Leeds, and a wise person once told me, the more you hear about a takeover, the less likely it is to happen. And the fact that the Peter Kenyon project is out in the open before he's even got the investors together doesn't bode well for this going all the distance. When some serious-minded people come in and have the right amount of money and are willing to spend it on Newcastle, and then look at the books and say, yes, that's definitely what we want to do, then there's a chance of a takeover. But holding out hopes for something to happen on the back of these stories, I think, would be a bit wishful.
What can we take from Mike Ashley suddenly starting to turn up at Newcastle matches still?
Look, he's got the most unbelievably thick skin ever. I mean, you guys quite right.
It's his house.
You guys just thought you went to see Palace, is that?
Every time his image appeared on the big screen at Newcastle yesterday, the boos are ringing out, the chants are ringing out. He just has a massive smile on his face. I mean, it must be horrendous for those supporters. It must just wind them up no end. I mean, that was the first time we've been to a home game since May 2017, I think, something like that.
16 months.
Yeah, that'd be right. Well, he doesn't look like somebody he's as Rob said, he doesn't look as if he's about to sell up. I mean, if he's starting to go and watch games, even after watching that horror show at Palace last week, which was just sounded a dreadful game of football, to then turn up to the Leicester City game and be subjected to that as well. Rafa Benitez didn't seem to be taking too many positives from his being there either. I suppose he would hope that if Ashley sees things firsthand, that how they are struggling on the pitch, because confidence-wise they are struggling on the pitch, then Rafa would hope that he would dip his hand in his pockets and buy them some players come January. But I think even that is a bit wishful thinking, to be honest.
Yet to win this season. There was some groans of disapproval with the substitution yesterday of Matt Ritchie. But could you ever see Newcastle fans turning on Rafa Benitez?
I think there has to be an outlet valve for those long-suffering Newcastle fans occasionally, and they seem to have caught themselves very quickly booing and sort of it wasn't sustained booing. Rafa is brilliant at bringing fans along with him. He did it on Merseyside. He seems to have their support, and to be fair, a manager of his calibre suffering what he's having to suffer from upstairs at the moment, I think it'll be a long time before Newcastle fans see him as as the main cause.
Yeah, a lot of sympathy for Rafa Benitez on this table this morning. I would like to talk about another story this week, which was Aaron Ramsey and his contract situation at Arsenal. Saw him when he was substituted yesterday, that he ignored Unai Emery as he walked off the field, shook his head. Arsenal went on to win that game with those 2 late goals against Watford at the Emirates. But what is your reading of that situation between Ramsey, Arsenal and Unai Emery?
My reading of it is that if you stay out of the Champions League for 2 years, you have to make some hard choices. And Arsenal are their wage bill is pushed to its absolute max because they signed up Mesut Ozil, because they've signed obviously Aubameyang and Mkhitaryan, and that was before the Unai Emery era. So kind of he's got no sort of wriggle room in that. And Lacazette was a record signing. And if you're going to pay someone around £200,000 a week, you've got to be sure he's your number 2, 3 player. And my guess is Emery probably doesn't think that. He's a very good player who, you'd want in your squad. But they seem to have preempted the situation of they don't want to get into sort of the Alexis Sanchez, Mesut Ozil sort of disaster of January. It's like, oh, will they, won't they sign? And say, well, actually, we can't go to that level. And I think they've got to find an Aaron Ramsey who will play for them for £100,000 a week. They've got to start being smarter at their contract negotiations. But overall, they've got to stop players running down their contracts, which has been a problem at Arsenal for years and years and years. And you sign them up 3 years before, don't you? When they're when they're thriving, when you've got time, that's when you do the deal and you offer them a bit more than they might have expected, and then you've got it. And you look at how Tottenham run their shit; they're forever, generally, there's 1 or 2 exceptions. It's like Delhi's agreeing new deal. They're forever getting players ahead of time to sign up deals, and it's much rarer to see a player at Tottenham run his contract down, and I think that's the principal problem. But essentially, Arsenal are not the financial force they were 3 years ago, and they now have to be more judicious with where they spend their money.
Is Aaron Ramsey in a powerful position here?
Well, yeah, he is, because the next contract, if he resists being sold in January, then he'll command a higher wage at his next club. That's the reality of it. I mean, I guess he may find his chances, his opportunities at Arsenal to play over the second half of the season, if he's still there, might be more limited than he would like. But I still think he's a player whose pedigree and quality is very obvious, and he's actually he is a consistent performer in a team where people like Mesut Ozil aren't consistent. So whoever brings him in knows exactly what they're getting from him. So yeah, that does, like any player that's run down his contract, that does present them they're in a position of power to negotiate what happens next.
Yeah, sure. OK. I'd like to mention their rivals in North London as well, Tottenham. It's not like us to accept that we may have got ahead of ourselves with the talk of Harry Kane's demise over the last few weeks, but he did score twice yesterday for Tottenham. Is his mini crisis? I'm not singling anybody out on this table. But we did, around the international break, of course, there was a lot of talk about Harry Kane and his form, his fitness, and measures and levels of fatigue.
Last international.
But did we get ahead of ourselves?
Last international break,
for the first time ever,
we sat around a table with Harry Kane, and I did push him on the fact that he's not taking any shots this season, and whether that was a sign of mental fatigue, and he got a little bit heated, and it looks like it was ahead of himself. It still stands. He's scoring goals, and that's not the issue.
Did it get heated? I don't think it was particularly heated.
No, narky then, perhaps.
Yeah, well,
he wasn't very impressed.
He
you
wasn't
said, Harry, you're not
it.
scoring any goals this season. What's the problem?
I wasn't. No, he said not taking any shots. He's scoring goals, and that's the point. That's great. He's a great goal scorer, and he's made himself that. But I still
maintain... that agitated.
OK, perhaps I will
very
took it personally.
Very
sensitive, you know. It didn't stop me writing it anyway.
No, I saw it, yeah.
But no, I still maintain he's not getting... He's 20 shots he's up to now, this season. He's had 20 shots. He's not taking as many shots. Now, all I'm asking is, why is that? Is it because of the system Pochettino's playing, with Moura further forward for a lot of it, so perhaps he's not getting the ball in an advanced position? Whatever it is. I've spoken to people at Spurs, and they say part of it is when you're not mentally right on it, you're not buzzing and seeing these opportunities to spin off defenders and make yourself available and get into those positions to score. Now, what he's doing is he's masking that by scoring when he does get the chances, which is great for Spurs because it's getting them results. The problem is, the games when he doesn't get a lot of shots and doesn't score, they've got a problem. And, you know, I'm just surprised. If you look back, when he came back after his clear summer in 2017, he went and he was shooting from all angles, scoring from all directions as well. And Spurs rode on the back of that. They aren't convincing. It wasn't a great performance against Huddersfield yesterday, by all accounts. But Kane's got his scoring boots on. He's getting better as a striker all the time. I admire him as a huge... someone who makes so much of what he's got. And we all smirked when he initially compared himself round about this time last year with challenging Messi and Ronaldo in their goal-scoring exploits. But he's gone out and backed himself and he's done it. And I think it shows an incredible mentality. But, you know, I'd like to see him getting more shots in. There, that's me.
Harry Kane, 5 goals this season. Sort your game out, mate.
Just take more shots.
I think that's the key.
Shots.
The mentality is the key, isn't it? Is that he will turn it around because he has that rock solid mentality that Shearer had, Lineker had. The best strikers have it. They're not always the best technical players, but they have that mentality.
Yeah,
that will
he's
just get
ruthless.
them
In
through.
fact, look at his penalty.
Well,
yesterday.
perhaps that's his
Absolutely
mentality. Although he's not getting too many chances, he's making sure he takes them.
Yeah, well, you'll be able to ask him about that this week when you see him for the England games against Croatia and Spain. OK, next up, we're going to talk about a team that needs a win, badly needs a win. That's Cardiff and Neil Warnock. More on them next. Welcome back. Let's talk Cardiff. They need a result. They need a win this afternoon. They've got Burnley. You're a big pal of Neil Warnock. You get on very well with him.
I like him.
Yeah, you do.
Loyal Express reader.
Loyal Express reader. What does Neil need to do to get results in the Premier League? Because as soon as he gets into the top flights, things seem to change for him.
Stop playing the teams in the top 7 of the Premier League would be a good start because their fixture list at the start
Just
of the
looking
season.
where Burnley are at the moment. And,
at the moment that's
awful
just an opportunity, but they finished 7th last season. 6 of their opening 10 games were against the top 7 last year. They've had an awful run of fixtures. They've messed up in games they should have done better in, but they were in the game against Chelsea for 81 minutes. If they wanted to stay up, perhaps spending a bit more money would have been a good idea because they've spent so little compared to other teams, and their wage bill is tiny even compared to teams like Huddersfield. So once again, he's been asked to work miracles on a budget, and you know they might scrap for enough points against teams like Burnley, and they're the ones they've got to win. I mean, Chelsea, Arsenal, they've played recently. You know, they're not Man City. They're not going to beat those teams very easily. What they need to do is pick up points against the teams that are around them, and I think this is a big game this afternoon, and they'll be looking for those 3 points.
But it's Neil Warnock teams, we associate them with that
It's not going to be pretty.
endeavour.
It's going to be, they're going to run hard and compete as well as they can. But when Manchester City can knock the ball around all those players really quickly, there's a limit to what you can do unless you've got the class to get on the ball a little bit. And have some possession yourself, and perhaps have a bit of respite. And they are lacking class at that team.
Don't want them to go down though with a whimper though. We want to see a team. OK, we know the restrictions, the financial restrictions that Neil Warnock is operating under at Cardiff, and we sense his frustration because of that. But they can still give it a go.
Well, they can, but I very much doubt it with the resources that they've invested in it, because it looks to me like it's almost as though they've gone, we're in the Premier League, we'll take the money, we'll take the parachute money when we go down. I mean, that's what it looks like from the summer they had and the spending they did, because it didn't look like the sort of spending. You're not expecting them to get to Wolves and Fulham's level of spending, which clearly was statement spending of, like, we're here to stay. But Huddersfield, when they came up, would have spent more, and they would have enlarged their wage bill a little bit more, not massively, but just to give you that chance of being there. Take the point about the fixtures; they've been very difficult. But the trouble is that the start of the season sets the tone, doesn't it? And you can just get into a rut.
Sorry, I'll get this right. We're saying that Cardiff aren't giving it a go, a team that took the lead against Chelsea and lost in the last gasp manner
saying,
to Arsenal.
I'm not talking about the team on the pitch. I'm talking about the investment they did in the summer.
Right.
So it looks to me like the ownership.
I think that's right.
Have gone. Well, you know, maybe Neil Warnock can get it. A bit like Mike Ashley's done with Rafa Benitez. He's effectively gone, well, my gamble is I don't need to spend on this squad because I think Rafa Benitez is a good enough manager to get us to fourth bottom. And that essentially seems to be the Newcastle model for me, and therefore it's a Premier League club worth a lot. They've done the same with Neil Warnock. And Neil Warnock doesn't have the same record in the Premier League. He has a great record, obviously, getting into the Premier League. And it looks to me like they've gone, well, Neil will sort this out and somehow will get us to fourth bottom. And then we've got a club that's in the Premier League and it's worth X million pounds.
OK, they've got Burnley this afternoon and do need to get some results in pretty quick if they're going to make a go of it. Tomorrow night is Bournemouth against Crystal Palace. We haven't mentioned Eddie Howe on this programme for some time. But the job that he has done at Bournemouth and is doing yet again. But why, as a young, progressive manager that everyone thinks very, very highly of, everybody respects, when the big jobs come up or when other jobs become available, Dom, why isn't Eddie Howe in the mix, in the frame for these? Why isn't his case being pushed further?
That's a really good question. I guess people look at Bournemouth and think that the homespun sort of atmosphere that he's created there, he is comfortable there. We know he had that difficult spell at Burnley. Was it 20 months up Burnley where it didn't quite work out, and he went back to Bournemouth, and it's all taken off since then. But that's a question you have to direct to, well, club hierarchies that are looking to recruit. He's doing a fantastic job. They've almost gone to another level this summer with certainly in recruitment, spending £25 million on players now on Lerner in midfield, and the fullbacks coming in at a big expense as well, Sergio Rico. So they are progressing, and some of the football they played in the first, well, this up to now in the season has been absolutely spectacular. We know there was a blip at Burnley last weekend, but I think they will be confident in their own ability to think that is literally what it was, just a blip. They played pretty well going forward in that game as well. There's a lot going right there, but there will be a point where they reach a ceiling at Bournemouth and they can't maybe break into that next bracket. The finances, even their finances, won't stretch towards making them a top 8, top 7 club. And where does that leave Eddie Howe? Does Eddie Howe then start looking seriously elsewhere? Because at the moment you just get the impression that he's perfectly content in keeping that bandwagon going.
Yeah.
But I think that the issue is, and for a lot of Premier League managers, is where's better than Bournemouth? Because there was an era when you'd go, oh, Newcastle United, Everton. And I was surprised Everton didn't even look at him because he's an Everton fan, famously, isn't he? But not that should make him a good manager, but that seemed sort of an obvious step up. But there's not a massive difference. In fact, Bournemouth has spent more money than Newcastle, so Bournemouth is a better club to manage if you're a Premier League manager than Newcastle. Yeah. So you can't make the jump to top 6 because you haven't managed Champions League.
He's certainly done a very good job at Bournemouth, though. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Thanks very much to the guys for joining us this morning: Dominic Fifield, Matt Dunn and Rob Draper.
Sky Sports Premier League. Feel it all.